Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. Today we're going to talk a little bit about heroes. And one of the things when I was thinking about this lecture is how there are different ideas, I guess, about what a hero is now based on how people wrote things, especially in the latter half of the 20th century, and especially movies. And that leads me to believe that I think a lot of people don't have a very broad, or maybe I don't want to say inaccurate, because people sometimes when they're thinking of heroes, they're thinking of heroes the way that heroes are written, in a Marvel movie, like superheroes. And they're not really thinking about how heroes are classically written. And that's kind of where I want to begin, because you'll find that if you're looking at something like even heroic fantasy, it has a different idea of what a hero is versus a more modern work. And while we are talking about that, we should also think about what an anti-hero is, because you can't know what an anti-hero is unless you also know what a hero is, and how an anti-hero is different from a villain. So we'll talk a little bit about villains as well in the entire discussion of what we're talking about. Villains as a antagonist, that's also somewhat modern. And if we go back and look at the classics, the idea of an antagonist being, quote, villainous is not always present. And so we'll talk about some of those things as well as we get into it. So first of all, what am I talking about when I talk about heroes? Well, I'm talking about a specific kind of character, a specific kind of figure that features in lots of different literature from the ancients. Whether we're talking about something like the Iliad or the Odyssey, especially if we're looking at the Greek tradition, but you find it in other cultures as well, like the Epic of Gilgamesh or even Samson in the Bible is a heroic figure. A hero in the classic sense is not made. A hero is born. And that's a very, very different thing from the way heroes tend to be done in modern movies, which is to have a hero start as a nobody and then become somebody. They even did this with the Hercules Disney movie. The Hercules had to do things to become Hercules, which is silly, because in the ancient tradition, a hero just is a hero. They're like a demigod, right? They're a Nephilim. They're, like Goliath, right? They're a force of nature almost. They are heroes by their very being. They're not heroes because of things they do. They're not even heroes because they have special virtue. They're not heroes because they're good. A hero is somebody who has something that is above a normal person's abilities, a normal person's capacities. That's what a hero is. So Hercules is just Hercules. He didn't become Hercules. He didn't become Heracles, right? He wasn't born a normal person and then went on some sort of hero's journey and became a hero. He simply was, because he was the son of Zeus. Same thing with Perseus, right? Perseus is great, and Perseus is actually Heracles' great-great-grandfather, I believe. So one of the reasons that Hercules is the strongest man ever is that not only is he the son of Zeus, he's also the son of the son of the son of Zeus, right? So he's more than half God. He's more than just a demigod. That's why he's super extra powerful. He has more of that divine force in him. So heroes are heroes because of a divine force. And if we look at the biblical Samson is a hero because the Holy Spirit comes upon him and makes him a hero. And kind of like Achilles, there's something that sets Samson apart, is that he doesn't cut his hair. Achilles was dipped in the river, and only his heels were out of the river, right? So that's his weakness. Samson's weakness is his hair, because he was dedicated as a Levite from birth. And so when the oath of the Levite is severed by cutting the hair, which traditionally was done for 7 years, for him it was a lifelong thing, then his power departs. His blessings from the Holy Spirit departs until he, in humility, prays for one last burst of strength to kill more Philistines. So heroes can have tragic ends, like Hercules, who ends up being burned alive, or Samson, who dies with blind, or they can have a triumphant end, or you can have things like Medea that show a different ending to the heroes than what we would get with normally the myths, and that's all part of the dramatic tradition. It doesn't mean canonically that like Medea is a canonical sort of myth. There's no such thing as myth canon. There was no such thing as that, right? There's no Bible to Greek myths. Most religions don't have a Bible. That's something that people tend to do with a, let's say, a Christian frame, right? They tend to go to basically thinking about it in entirely Christian terms. I'm going to share this on Twitter. Make sure people are hopping in. I'm going a little bit earlier today. This is really my normal time, David started as an ordinary shepherd, then was anointed by Samuel on God's orders and became a hero when he faced Goliath. Well, he's not really a hero, like what I'm talking about. Goliath was the hero. So the whole point of the David and Goliath story is that David is not a hero. He's a boy. He's a boy that no one really maybe believes in. He's only special because of the things that we hear in the Bible. But Goliath is a Nephilim. Goliath is a hero. And he's a hero kind of in the Greek tradition. So if you read the Iliad or the Odyssey, you'll find that these heroes would go and face off in battle. Chariots would bring the hero to the front lines, and then they would have these sort of heroic battles. And they were bigger, they were stronger, and you kind of get this. There's some language in the Iliad, especially that's like that the men of yore were stronger. This part of this myth of the golden man going down into the decayed and fallen Iron Man is part of Greek mythology, and you find it in lots of different mythological systems. But I think what's cool about David is that it's kind of an inversion of this. David is probably more what we would think of as a modern hero, but he's not a hero in the classical sense, right? The whole thing about him beating Goliath is that he wasn't a hero. He wasn't bigger, stronger, better than normal men. He killed him with a slinging stone, which was actually a weapon of war that the Assyrians used to really great effect later on. So we hear sling and we think slingshot, but really what it is there's a different layer to it. A sling was a war weapon back in the Bronze Age. It absolutely was, and they used to use it to hit people up on walls and all kinds of things. So slings were very powerful. It's really that David came out and killed Goliath with something that Goliath didn't expect. He attacked Goliath's weakness. Goliath was really big, really strong. There was no way David could physically overpower him. So he could have shot him with an arrow, right? But the sling, for whatever, because we don't think of the sling as a war weapon in modern times, we think of arrows and things. We don't realize that that's basically what David did. Is David killed him with a ranged weapon because there was no hope of actually overcoming him with heroic strength. David was not a hero. He was let's say a messianic figure, right? He's an anointed one. And that's something different than a hero. So when we talk about classical heroes, that's what we mean. Is they are bigger and stronger and better by their very nature, according to who they were. And we see this with modern heroic fiction as well. By modern, I mean modern in the period sense, 20th century, late 19th century. We're really, we've been stuck in the postmodern period now for 70 years, but we'll talk about kind of postmodern inversions of the hero. But, if you think of Conan or Kull or Solomon Kane by Robert E. Howard, or you could think of, John Carter from the Princess of Mars and the Barsoom books. These are closer to heroes. Even John Carter, who starts as a normal guy, right? But Conan is Conan. Conan is the best because he's Conan. He really is a heroic figure. He's something more than a man. He has greater wit, greater strength than normal men, and he goes on adventures. What do heroes fight? Heroes fight monsters. So if you look at Perseus, Perseus kills Medusa, and he's killing monsters, right? Heracles is killing monsters like the Hydra, right? So all of these heroic acts that we look at in the classical tradition, the hero is not just more than a man, he's also got tasks that are more than a man. They're divine tasks. So there's a connection between the hero and divinity. And even with David, right? David has a divine connection, of course. But Aeneas has a divine connection, even though we wouldn't think of him as a hero necessarily. He's favored by the gods, at least. Odysseus has a divine connection. He's favored by some of the gods, at least. The Odyssey is really about the adventure, not of a hero, of like a demigod, but of a normal man trying to get back to what matters, which is the human existence. So the Odyssey has a very different focus than the Iliad. The Iliad is all about the heroes, Achilles and Ajax and Hector and these larger than life men. And Odysseus is about one man trying to get back to what matters, his human life, against all odds, and literally against the gods, triumphing against the gods. So it's a very triumphant story, even though it's very long and arduous for Odysseus. Really interesting flavors that get caught up in the story of Odysseus. So that's the classical tradition of heroes. The modern tradition of heroes really is it's an almost postmodern treatment of it, where we take someone and we turn them into Perseus. We take someone and we reveal that they are actually Perseus. There's an element to that in the classics as well. But you have someone like Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is a hero closer to the regular tradition. He's like got the Force, and he's strong with the Force. So he has an indwelling strength that he's just not aware of, and he has to be made aware of it. But the modern thing is there's this like growth arc. Like heroes have to have a growth arc. They have to grow, but that's not really present in any kind of pre-modern works. Even if you look at something like Sherlock Holmes, what's Sherlock Holmes' growth? What's Conan's growth? Not a lot of growth. You don't have to have a character grow. That's kind of a modern feeling that Zero has to ascend to hero. There's nothing wrong with that treatment, but thinking that that's the way that you have to write heroes is actually not true. And that's not been the case in the past, and that's not really the case today either. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about heroes. So with that in mind, the word hero appears in some Bible translations. It means military champion, right? There in my translations, like the mighty fighting men is what they use, not hero. Now those were the Nephilim, the heroes of old. So in Genesis, they actually refer closer to what heroes were in the classical tradition, which is like basically a demigod, right? The Nephilim, who were the offspring of fallen angels and human beings, and were giants, the Nephilim, like Goliath. The heroes of old, on the earth then and also afterwards. Interesting. There's a lot of interesting bits packed into just those couple verses from Genesis. So keep that in mind. When we're talking about heroes, we're really talking about a literary tradition of heroes, not just like biblical mighty fighting men. Samson fits closer to that paradigm, but really a lot of the stuff from different cultures will have this focus on the hero being essentially having a divine connection, being like the son of a god or something like that. Let's think about anti-heroes. So before we can think about an anti-hero, we have to think about what a hero was. A hero is not a hero simply because he's good. That's a modern thing. When we think of the hero of the story, people say the hero of the story. What they mean is protagonist. The guy who's doing the protagging, the guy who's the main character of a story, rather than him being a hero in the classical sense of a hero, like a demigod, powerful being, fighting epic battles, right? They just mean he's the main character of the story. And that's fine. It's fine. So heroes of old were brave, They were very strong. They were clever. They, didn't shirk from duty. But they weren't necessarily good the way we would think of it. It was more like the Nietzschean view of good and bad versus good and evil. So a villain, and the word villain is a French word, vilain, right? It comes from French, and it basically means peasant or country person or pagan. So the Latin words pagan and heathen basically mean country bumpkin, and villain has more or less the same term. So a villain is not a bad guy in the modern sense that he's evil, but he's a bad guy in the way Nietzsche describes it in Beyond Good and Evil, as somebody who has like lower human capacity, an Untermensch, right? So a villain in most older forms of literature is somebody who has the opposite. He's the opposite of the hero in terms of his vices versus his virtues, like classical virtues of bravery and honor. We have other virtues, dishonesty, covetousness. He'll be weak and, petty. Think of someone like Shylock from Merchant of Venice, and you have an idea of what a villain is actually supposed to be versus merely an antagonist. An antagonist is an antagonist, and he may actually be a hero. It may be the Hector to Achilles. But a villain is like a fallen person, a person who hates the hero because the hero is good while he is bad. Not an evil man, but a bad man, a man of bad quality. All right, so in the olden view of a villain, it's a man of bad quality. There's a modern movie that gets this really on the nose, and it's Unbreakable, an M. Night Shyamalan movie with Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson. And in that movie, Bruce Willis discovers that he's unbreakable. He can't be killed. And it turns out like everything had been set up by a real villain, Samuel L. Jackson. His bones are brittle and they break constantly. He has no internal meaning. His entire meaning is focused on finding the hero that's the opposite of himself. And he explains that out pretty explicitly. So you have this kind of moment of catharsis that happens towards the end of the movie where this gets explained kind of in superhero terms. And so it actually really shows the difference between what a villain is and a hero is outside of the good and evil dynamic and in the good and bad dynamic. A good quality man versus a bad quality man. If you look at superheroes I think are actually very much in the classical hero tradition. People love superheroes. I'm not super into superheroes anymore, but there's people who still like them as adults, and they like Marvel movies and that kind of stuff. So if we look at Superman is the archetypical superhero. He is a hero. He's hero by his own nature. He's a hero. He's not a hero because he is really nice. He's better than normal men. He's stronger than them. Now, he's also more virtuous, right? He's honest. He's good. He cares about the innocent. Greek heroes maybe not have cared that much about that, but Superman does because he's a modern hero, and that's fine. He's got a broader sense of Christian virtue, even though he was made by Jews. There's still going to be elements of that virtue tradition in there, and because they're in a Christian society, our Christian society is really built on virtue ethics, and to try to ignore virtue ethics in the form of like liberal ethics kind of misses what makes our society really tick and how we admire people. So Superman's a hero. He puts on, this is like, they had this in Kill Bill, right? It's like Superman puts on a suit to become a normal human. And what is Clark Kent? Clark Kent is kind of villainous, not in the evil sense, but he's lowly. He's nearsighted. He wears glasses. He's weak and he's mild-mannered. It's like what Superman views normal people to be. But Superman's a superhero. And his villains, there's a reason that you have like mad scientist villains. Mad scientist villains work great because they are villains. They're petty, they're weak, they're covetous. And if you want to write a great villain, you gotta hype up those kinds of vices. So the villain should be, the hero's strong and brave. The villain is cowardly and deceptive, and physically weak. He's also covetous. He wants a woman that he can't have. maybe the hero's love interest, right? The villain is jealous, whereas the hero is not jealous. Why would the hero be jealous? He's greater than normal men. There's very little to be jealous about because he's better, right? So he doesn't suffer from jealousy because part of his being is being better than other men. So if you're writing a great villain, having those elements be a part of his personality will make him a much more compelling villain. He'll have a lot more reasons to do what he's doing, and he'll be a lot more hated by the audience, which is also very useful. Yes, Lex Luthor started off as more of a mad scientist type. That's right. Lex Luthor is often bald. Right? Why does the baldness of Lex Luthor matter? Because hair is a vanity, right? So he's bald, you know? He's greedy. He's corrupt. There's lots of things about Lex Luthor that make him a great villain. I agree, Fiona Wolf. Would you say what makes a hero is that they embody one of the 7 virtues like temperance? No, not at all. Not in a classical sense. In a classical sense, not at all. That was not what made a hero. What made a hero was the fact that he was divine. And when you look at the myths, it's often confusing. Like, why do they worship this guy Zeus who comes down and rapes women? This like sexual predator god. And it's like, and he's, the gods are vindictive to each other. Like the Trojan War kind of begins because some of the goddesses decide to have a beauty contest and have Paris judge it. Right? This is not something that virtuous people do, right? But that's a different consideration. Virtue was part of a philosophical tradition that wasn't fully bound up in the myths that made up Greek society and Roman society, classic society, and even Near Eastern society, like Assyrian, Babylonian, Hebrew, even Egyptian stuff, right? If you look at the myths and the legends of these cultures, virtue is not part of that. Now, today, you may want to make a hero that embodies some part of the 7 virtues, right? You may want to make a hero that embodies that, has some kind of special strength in that, because that'll make him extra likable. It'll make him extra compelling. So there's a good reason to do that. But that's not what makes a hero in the classic examples. If you're writing, just if we just abstract these terms and we're like a hero and a villain, a good guy and a bad guy, you want your good guy to have virtue. You want your protagonist to have virtue so that your audience likes him. And you want your antagonist to have vice so the audience dislikes him. That's a really basic writing technique, and it works great. But what makes a hero is really that he's stronger. So the superhero tradition really does this. And I actually think, while Superman's kind of the archetypical one, you even have say someone like Tony Stark. Tony Stark is not physically strong. In fact, he's physically weak, but he wears a suit, which makes him strong. And at the same time, he depends on that suit to be alive. Like he wouldn't be able to operate without the machines. But it's his insane intelligence that he uses to make himself powerful. So he has some element about him that's just better than other people. He is smarter. He's a super genius. Spider-Man. He gets bitten by a spider. It turns him into a superhero. This is more what modern audiences, I think, like with a growth arc of a superhero. There's a reason why Spider-Man is so popular. Spider-Man is a nerd. So if you read the first issue of Spider-Man, you can just look it up. I'm sure I'm sure you could just find Google images of it. From that, I think it's Amazing Fantasy number 15 or whatever. Spider-Man is a nerd that the girls don't like, and the boys make fun of. He's physically weak. He's basically kind of a villain, right? Not a bad guy, but just, he's lowly. He's like an Untermensch. He does have one strength about him, which is that he's smart, but people make fun of him for being a bookworm, right? He gets bitten by the spider. It turns him into a superhero. He gains physical strength, and not just physical strength beyond that of a normal man, and the ability to do all kinds of other things. So it's Lex Luthor originally had red hair. And later on he gets bald. Like he showed his bald a lot, and then like a lot of other media. But like why? Because bald represents a genetic deficiency, right? Same thing with nearsightedness. He's lower, right? So yeah, Peter Parker, he's a nerd. He gets turned into Spider-Man. And then what's the first lesson he learns is that as a hero, he has responsibilities, right? That a hero has to do heroic things. That a hero has to be virtuous. This is a modern treatment of hero, but it's a really good one. And I think it's one that resonates with a lot of people for that reason, is that we understand that somebody who's greater than other people actually has a responsibility to use that for the betterment of those people. And in a lot of ways, that is classic as well. It's not like Perseus goes around slaying monsters for his own benefit, right? He doesn't just do it for fun or because he's hungry and wants to eat them or something weird like that. Odysseus is not doing great acts because of selfishness, but because of responsibilities he has towards his wife and his home and his kingdom. All those things are really important. So there are virtues that heroes will have, but that's not what turns them into a hero. It's not what makes them heroic. And so I guess that's the bigger point that I want to make there, is that it's really more about sort of their being there. Let's talk about anti-heroes now. Now that we've kind of identified what a hero and a villain is, what's an anti-hero? Well, an anti-hero is just someone who does heroic things, but has the traits of a villain. A classical villain. Lowly, weak, vindictive, pathetic, dishonorable, deceptive, right? Has vices and has weaknesses, severe weaknesses. Best example of an anti-hero, and the reason that we see anti-heroes proliferate is because it's a postmodern treatment of a hero. How can we invert the hero? How can we make the hero not heroic? How can we make the hero more compelling and more human and more interesting while we make him an anti-hero? So Elric of Melniboné is probably the best example that I can think of, which is that Elric is not strong. He's physically very weak. He has deficient blood. If he doesn't receive drugs on a regular basis, he'll be unable to operate, unable to walk, unable to move, unable to do anything. So it's a really kind of lowly person that is Elric. Elric also lacks the kind of heroic virtues we would expect, even from a classical hero. He's not brave. He's cowardly. He's vindictive. He's uncertain with his loyalties. He betrays people. He kills the woman he loves at one point. He kills his friends. He's the slave to this sword who he has to kill people with the sword to get souls, and the souls feed him with enough strength for him to go on living. There's this attachment to this demonic sword bringer, that defines his entire life and his downfall and everything that goes with it. But Elric is doing what we would actually think of as heroic things. He's conquering castles. He's fighting and destroying monsters. He's overcoming godlike beings. He's sacking and destroying cities. He's doing the things that the classic heroes would do, but he himself does not embody any of the traits of a classic hero, right? He's physically like crumbling to dust, basically, right? So it makes a compelling character. It makes an interesting character with this like addiction to swords and things like that. What's another example is probably Thomas Covenant, who I've talked about on the channel before. So the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, they're not for the faint-hearted. This one takes it to a bigger extreme in that Thomas Covenant, the titular character, is not only not brave, he's not strong, he's a leper, right? People hate him. People are disgusted by him. People are afraid of him. And he has all of this internal dialogue about how wretched and awful he is and about how terrible his life is. It's a constant internal cycle of grief and angst and self-hatred that goes on with Thomas Covenant. He's been afflicted by leprosy, but he's also vindictive. He pines for the wife who left him after he acquired leprosy, and the child she took away from him. he is completely reluctant when he gets sucked off into this fantasy land called the land. He's reluctant to be a hero. Everyone tells him that he's the hero of the story, right? That he was brought into the world to overcome this thing. He has a ring of power, right? It's a white gold ring that has like magical powers. His wedding ring, which he refuses to take off because he's in such anguish over his wife leaving him for being a leper. Despite all that reluctance, he gets carried through the story and ends up performing heroic acts and becoming a hero. I hate to say becoming a hero, but doing heroic acts. Even though he's a pathetic, unlikable character, he's the epitome of the anti-hero. There's nothing heroic about him, but he is in a story of a hero doing heroic acts almost against his will. So what makes an anti-hero compelling to people? As I ask rhetorically, I think there's a lot of things that can make anti-heroes very compelling. There's a lot of things. So the first one is that they are more human, which means we can identify with them a little bit more. The other one is that they're just more interesting than a regular hero. A regular hero who has everything sorted out and just sort of is can get boring compared to someone who is like a bad guy. It's someone who's a bad man and has to figure out how to be strong. There's some opportunity for growth. And in some ways, it's sort of the inversion of a tragic hero, right? A tragic hero is a hero that has some sort of flaw, usually hubris or something like that, causes him to have a downfall. And when we're watching a tragedy, there's a desire usually in the audience for the tragic hero to pull out of the nosedive, to not do the bad thing he's thinking of doing, to turn away from what he's doing, to make different decisions than what he's making. The anti-hero is the opposite. Is like there's maybe some humanizing element of it. We want him to be better, right? We want, think of like Shinji in what am I thinking of here? Evangelion. Sorry. Mind part. He's kind of an anti-hero, right? He's a weak, pathetic little passive boy who gets thrust into the place that he doesn't want to be, where he has to be a hero. And we want him to turn it around the entire time, and he just never does. He just fails. He fails to grow into his... So it's a tragic failure, right? He's kind of like a tragic hero in that sense. But he's really like an anti-hero. So he's like a tragic anti-hero. We want the anti-hero to stop being an anti-hero, to stop being villainous and become something greater. And when he doesn't do that, that's deeply disappointing, right? What would be a good example of an anti-villain? That would be like the main character from Fugitive. Not the main character, the guy that Tommy Lee Jones plays. I don't remember the name of the character. Right, so he's the cop chasing the protagonist. He's the antagonist, but he's actually good. So he's virtuous, but he's also a good man, and he's doing heroic things just against the protagonist of the story. So that might be like an anti-villain, right? So it's someone who's in the role of a villain, but doesn't have the villainous traits. He's not like a fallen Shylock kind of worthless little man, right? He's a good man, but he's the antagonist of the story. And I love stories like The Fugitive because we can root for both characters. What we really root for is the truth. We want Harrison Ford's character to clear his name. We want Tommy Lee Jones's character to find out the truth through the qualities of himself, like investigating the mystery, if you want, Oh yeah, Deadpool's on the rise. Yeah. Fiona says, but when everything out there is some take on anti-hero, nothing stands out. Yes. The U.S. side of the house goes 6 feet under to copycat anything that may trend even for a moment. Oh, Deadpool's on the rise. Quick, everyone make all the characters snarky quippers. Only dystopia and young adult can be viable match because of Hunger Games sold like hotcakes. Yeah, so this is a problem with any trend, is that you have Moorcock, you have Stephen Donaldson. They do anti-hero characters. Those anti-hero characters, I think, are way more interesting, and the stories are also way more interesting than what comes after them. What the modern distillation of an anti-hero is kind of like Deadpool, which is just like a badass hero who's not nice. He's just not really nice. He's sarcastic and mean. I'd say Wolverine's almost in that category too. Well, bub. They're not really anti-heroes because they're not, they're not weak, right? They're still heroic in some sense. Or we think of like the Punisher as an anti-hero. Well, the Punisher is a vigilante. He's a good guy. Oh, but he's doing things with bad means. Well, there's the only moral question with the Punisher is whether it's bad to be a vigilante, right? Like, can you do good things via bad means? Is murdering bad guys wrong? That's kind of the only moral question. But really, we love the Punisher because he's doing what the government doesn't do, which is mete out punishment to bad guys. This is a deeper spiritual thing that has to do with the West that maybe someone will talk about in hundreds of years. They'll be like, the Punisher was this comic book character from the end of the 20th century that people really loved because he met out punishment to criminals when the police force, it often felt like the police force was not doing this for lots of people, right? There's no way for the common man to go out and punish criminals. You know what I'm saying? So is the Punisher an anti-hero? Not really. No, he's just he's a vigilante. And he's not even really a superhero, He's just a guy, isn't he? It's been a long time since I read any Punisher comics, but he's a vigilante. It's the story of the vigilante. He's an ultra-violent Robin Hood, right? Is Robin Hood an anti-hero? No, Robin Hood's a heroic figure. So no, Punisher is a hero. He's not an anti-hero. Deadpool, we think of him as an anti-hero, but he lacks, maybe because of his like horrible facial scarring, that makes him more like Thomas Covenant. He's more like a leper, but I don't know. You'll have to see in modern treatments. All of it starts to get lost in the mix. The other thing that we get is these aren't really like anti-heroes necessarily. Think of something like mobster movies like The Godfather or The Sopranos, maybe. The Sopranos is probably a better example because we really actually root for Tony Soprano, who's a bad guy. He's evil, right? He's not bad. He's bad a little bit in the sense of like Nietzschean good and bad, but he's actually evil. Like he does evil things. We still kind of root for Tony Soprano. We want him to somehow be successful with his evil because he's a compelling and interesting character that we like to watch. I think that's a little bit different than heroes and anti-heroes. I think we're trying to shove too many things under heroes and anti-heroes, right? Like, is Tony Soprano an anti-hero? No, he's the protagonist of a mob story and is a mobster. So we can find it compelling when there's a bad guy who's the main character. And he's not even really villainous. Right? He's a little bit like he's overweight and like vindictive and angry. He is a bit of a villain, but he's the main character, so we kind of like him, In Godfather, Michael Corleone is a tragic hero. He falls to evil. He has the potential to be good, and he wants to be good, but through his desires to protect his family, to fulfill the missions of his family, he becomes the head of the Corleone crime family and ends up doing horrible, unspeakable acts, including murdering his own brother. And the second movie ends with his wife like divorcing him and declaring that she had an abortion, right? That's like fully completing the consequence of his fall. So Michael Corleone is really a tragic hero. He's not an anti-hero. And nor is Vito an anti-hero. Vito is just, he's a protagonist for half of the first movie and half of the second movie in different circumstances. It's really about how people step over the line and start doing evil things for purposes they deem are good. They're Machiavellians more than anti or pro anything. It's more about like the kind of, I'm not sure what the feeling is. Someone might be able to think of the right feeling. It's not like Schadenfreude. It's not like enjoying seeing bad things happen to bad people. It's the opposite of that. It's like enjoying seeing good things happen to Machiavellians. You know, people who are very, you know, it's kind of like, you know, watching the villain be successful. That's sort of crime movie stuff. But I don't think of them as anti-heroes. A lot of people kind of throw them in that category. I'm like, nah, it's really about inverting the qualities of the hero and then having that person still doing like in a heroic story. That's what an anti-hero is. And like Fiona Wolf says, we've had so many years of it that now it's just sort of an old passe thing, and we don't even really know what heroes are anymore. It's like we really need to go back and read more Robert E. Howard. We need to go back. Tarzan is a hero. Okay, Tarzan is great because when you get a sense of Tarzan, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Tarzan is not a heroic and powerful figure because he was raised with apes. He's that kind of despite being raised by apes. Despite being raised by apes, he maintains his like quality as an Englishman. And he's still virtuous and things like that. He's a really interesting heroic treatment. And he's a heroic figure. He's stronger and better than normal men. The Punisher. What do you think of Man with No Name trilogy? I enjoyed it. I haven't watched westerns in any western in a while, and I haven't watched those in a while. I'll still have the DVDs sitting around somewhere. I enjoyed them. I don't think of them as like heroes or anti-heroes, right? It's again kind of more of the mob story stuff. It's Machiavellian men pursuing their own fortunes and doing it that way. I wouldn't call it heroic. Again, like part of the problem, one of the reasons I wanted to make this video is like people throw way too many things under one category. They're like, is this guy a hero? Like it's not a heroic story. He's not a hero. He's the protagonist maybe, but he's not a hero. He's a bounty hunter cowboy that kind of is happy to double cross people. He's a Machiavellian sort of character, you know? And even when we say like tragic hero, we don't think of like hero in the classical sense. A lot of times we think of a noble character, right? So the idea of a hero being noble, it's kind of there in the classics. It becomes more, I think we take on the idea of it being noble via sort of medieval traditions. I think the idea of like extreme nobility of the hero is like an Arthurian sort of thing. You see it in a more medieval context because by that time we were no longer pagan, we were Christians, and so we're going to attach to heroes the things that make Christians good, which is going to be virtue ethics. Makes sense. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with making your hero virtuous. But it's more like how you tell a heroic story. It's more about the hero doing like crazy, incredible things. So when we're thinking about what an anti-hero is, we have to think about a more standard definition of hero rather than something really broad where like, you know, the main character is always a hero or something like that. The only English class where I learned the classical meaning of hero was an intensive reading class I had to take because I didn't do well on the standardized test. Well, good for that teacher. Man, I never learned about this stuff until I took classics with classicists. You know, I never had anyone tell me this really until I was a graduate student and started studying classics. Really, I started studying classics as like a freshman in college, but I got a little more serious about it, taking Latin and stuff later. I never had an English teacher tell me this. They were kind of clueless about it. They didn't think about it at all. And it's not that English teachers are bad. It's that where's their focus? Their focus isn't with the classics. Yeah, they're going to have to have studied the classics at some point to understand literature, especially Greek drama. The Greek drama tradition, I mean, it goes all the way down to today. Like movies are an extension of Greek drama if you go far enough back. And literature is an extension of the Homeric epic, right? So you need to know that stuff. But their focus tends to be on modern literature. And in modern literature, a lot of these things get lost. And because you're dealing with structuralist and post-structuralist ideas, something that I think is really valuable for people that just want to have a broad idea is to maybe take an art history class, or find some videos on YouTube about art history, going from the post-romantic all the way up to today, because you'll find some interesting trends. There's a mindset, and I almost never see people talking about the mindset of modern art. The mindset of the modern artist or the modern writer, any modern, and when we're talking modern, we're actually talking like 1890s to like 1945. At the end of World War II, we really enter the postmodern period. Postmodern has a totally different set of thoughts. Modern is, we're going to make new aesthetics. So you notice this extreme break between post-romantic art, stuff that's like pre-Raphaelites, all the trends that existed in post-romantic art, even through Impressionism. There's a severe break between that and Pablo Picasso, Cubism, abstract sculpture, surrealist paintings and surrealist sculpture. There's a super big break between the post-romantic and the modern. And the idea of the modern is we can make new aesthetics, new aesthetic systems. It's so much easier to see it in music actually than art, because art, you have people that were really very much trained to do art. Like you can look at early Van Gogh and it looks like post-romantic art, or into German Expressionism and these sorts of modern movements. The idea is we can make new aesthetics. Man, the focus is on the man, not on God, right? Not on God's creation and representing it faithfully and beautifully. But we as man are going to make new things. If you listen to the music of Arnold Schoenberg, who invented 12-tone technique, Anton Webern, these guys, most modern people can't stand that music. It's like unlistenable. And that's because they have this mentality of like, we're going to make something new. We're going to create new aesthetics. So a lot of literature, people who have literature degrees, their focus tends to be on stuff that came in the 20th century and onward. And there's a big disconnect even in literature between that and the stuff that came before it, right? Very, very big difference. So you may have stuff like Ulysses by James Joyce as a great example of modern literature. It's all about different aesthetic styles, kind of in this retelling of the Odyssey, a classic. But it's more about the style than it is about the story and the kind of stuff I talk about. The kind of stuff I tend to talk about is really part of the corporate period of the arts. And I have a very extensive set of articles on this on my Substack, okay? So I'm just going to link the whole Substack. Let me find it here. I'm just going to link the whole Substack. Corporate art, pop art is a thing in the 20th century. That's not, we have folk art and high art in the 19th century. The 20th century, we have kind of academic art and pop art, corporate art. So I'm talking more about stuff that you're going to see in the corporate stream. Genre fiction, stories, bestsellers, right? This is movies, comic books, games. To explain like a postmodern piece of work, even early postmodern like Catch-22, it's about the way the book's constructed and not so much any of the stuff I'm talking about, like the classical ideas of heroes and villains and protagonists and antagonists. It's not about that. So if you read Catch-22, you're being for a ride because it's not about any of those things. It's about how the book is constructed to make you question the authenticity of the narrative itself. You're going to get the same thing with, like, people always want me to read Cormac McCarthy, but I don't like his prose because it's so postmodern. It just annoys me, right? And I'll probably read a whole book and do an evaluation. People get all angry because they love his writing for reasons I don't really understand. Every time I try to make an attempt to read one of his books, it's like, man, this prose is just dog shit. It's just run-on sentence gobbledygook. But he does that on purpose because he's like, commas are bad and dumb. I'm like, that's a postmodern way of thinking. So anyway, yeah, a lot of literature literature teachers are not going to think about this classical stuff because they're more focused on the style of modern stuff, because that's where the focus was. It's in how it's constructed, not these like big broad ideas. One of my favorite classical heroes, if he is one, is Odysseus. I really love checking out the Odyssey and seeing what made it great. Also Hercules. So Odyssey is kind of an interesting treatment, because Odysseus is not, he's heroic in the sense that the entire Iliad and Odyssey are about the heroic age. So the Greeks had this belief that there was a heroic age in the past. Like I said, it's actually referenced in the Bible too. Not just a Greek thing. There were this heroic age. So Odysseus was a hero in that sense. I don't believe he was a descendant of the gods in the way that Heracles was, or Perseus, or Achilles, or, but he was a hero in that sense. And what his entire struggle is about, struggling against the gods, not having divine favor for the gods the way, say, Perseus did, but fighting against the gods, offending the gods, dealing with the fallout of that. Like one of the reasons that all this bad stuff happens, he gets gifts from gods, his men undo that, like he gets the bag of wind and his men think it's treasure, I think, and they open it, and thus like ruin their chances of blowing back home to Ithaca. He gets captured by a nymph, and the nymph is like, no, you're going to stay here on this island with me and bang me forever. And he's like, no, I have to go home to what matters, which is my human life, my wife, my kingdom, my son, the things that matter to me, the things that make me a man. And in some sense, there's the idea that for a Greek, it was better to be a man than to be a god. Gods were they were immortal, and therefore there are no consequences to their actions. They couldn't perform heroic deeds because they couldn't die. There's no heroism when there's no consequence. So even the heroes, the demigods, could die, and they were greater than regular men, but there was this idea of danger to what they were doing, and doing like incredible works. But Odysseus is doing heroic things. He's slaying monsters. He is bound up in the fates of the gods. He goes to hell itself. He goes to Hades. These are all things that a hero does. So all the things he does are heroes, even though he's not like a demigod. So I think he probably does qualify as a hero, but it's an interesting treatment because it's about the struggle of the human against the divine is sort of the meta of the Odyssey, and I love it for that reason. It's just it's something that just has a big impact, that he's willing to go through all the trials and tribulations just to get home to his home and his wife and the things that matter for him. Spends 20 years, right? He spends 10 years in Troy and 10 years getting back, and his wife has been faithful to him for 20 years, right? Like, what an ending. And he kills all the suitors, I love it. 20 years later, he's still bigger and stronger than all of them. What do you think about tragic heroes being too charismatic? Or the tragedy too romanticized? I once read all war and anti-war movies led to increases in enlistment. I don't know how those two things go together, but, I think are you trying to write a tragedy? What are you trying to get the audience to feel? Do you want the audience to feel sad? Then you got to make that fall really tragic. You want it to be tragic. You don't want people to be left numb. I think people will be numb if you're not able to make the tragic hero, if you're not able to make them care about a tragic hero. Right? Let's see here. Are anti-heroes just protagonists who aren't good people? No. I see so many people get caught up when a main character does bad things because they think it means the artwork is promoting their behavior. No. In fact, that's not necessarily an anti-hero. It's just a protagonist. Protagonists can be Machiavellian. They can be bad. They can be evil. It depends what you want the audience to care about with the story. We care about Tony Soprano being a Machiavellian jerk because there's a certain pleasure that comes from watching somebody get the best of other bad people. Like Tony Soprano is mostly getting the best of other bad people. We kind of hope that he'll be better, but he's not really an anti-hero. So no, an anti-hero is not a protagonist who's bad. That's a modern kind of distillation of it that misses the whole point. An anti-hero is an Untermensch. He's a lesser man. He's less than a hero. He's vindictive, petty, weak, usually physically weak. A hero is strong. You know, an anti-hero is weak, right? So I don't think that. Are you a cannibal if you eat a person turned into an animal? Boy, that's a good question. I don't see how that's possible to do. And if you do, so what? There's actually a Norse myth about this. Otter. And I think I think this is also the first. So there's 4 parts to the ring cycle. I think this is number 1. The death of Otter. So the gods are out exploring. Loki and Odin and Thor, I think. I think it's those 3. It may be like Odin, Vili, and Loki. I know Odin and Loki are there. They're walking along. Loki sees an otter playing in the river. He's like, I'll get us a tasty dinner. Picks up a rock, flings it at the otter, kills him. They skin the otter. He throws the otter over his shoulder, goes. They find a farmhouse. They're like, hey, why don't we share this meal with you? And you can let us stay here, and we'll share. I've got this. We went hunting, and we killed this otter, and we can eat it. Right? And the guy, now like eating the otter, they would have actually eaten a person, because it turns out it was like this person's son transformed. And so they capture the gods with this magic net. Loki has to go, and he has to fill Otter's skin up with gold and cover it with gold. And so he does that, and he goes to the dwarves and robs the dwarves, and the dwarves put a curse on a ring that they give Loki. And he's like, all the better, because I'm not keeping this gold. So he gives the cursed ring to Otter's father, and it causes all kinds of tragic stories with Sigurd. Very interesting. So yeah, that's how the ring cycle begins, is with like, we're eating a transformed person. We're eating this otter. It's interesting. What about, Loki turns into a horse and gets impregnated as a mare and gives birth to Sleipnir. Blood Meridian's a masterpiece. The prose in it is so bad. Child of God, The Orchard Keeper, The Outer Dark are genuinely unhealthy for the reader, though. Haven't read any other McCarthy. But on the subject of heroes, McCarthy puts 0 heroes in those 4 books. Yeah, there's no heroes. They're just different people pursuing different objectives. You don't have to have a hero in a story, right? Back here, had to take care of the baby. Congrats on the baby, by the way. I don't see society moving away from the classical definition of heroes as a bad thing. A definition based on moral virtue is more beneficial to the audience. I think it's more medieval. That's fine. It's not a bad thing. But we want to start with the earliest version and like peel away stuff that we kind of stick onto it. It's like Lancelot versus Arthur. I mean, compare those two. They're both heroic. They do heroic feats and things like that. Hey, Harry cast Crucio. Lord Soth is a great tragic fall. Do they identify as an animal? Can you eat someone who says they're an animal? May Norse mythology was crazy. Ever read The Nightland? Love the setting. Really good. No, I haven't read it. Yeah, my general problem with McCarthy's writing is like rebelling against like conventional punctuation and clauses makes it a chore to read for me. And you have to ask this question, like, is language communicative? Like, why are you writing in a language? Are you writing in a language because other people know the language? Then, how much do you need to conform to the conventions of that language in order to properly communicate to another person? Because language doesn't exist inside you and me. It's a postmodern idea that you can just throw punctuation out. I'm just going to change the language. I'm going to write in Scots and tell people to read it. I'm going to write in a made-up language. Like that the meaning is completely fluid because the language isn't real. It's a postmodern idea. No, the language is fixed between us. That's how I'm able to talk in English and you're able to understand me in English, is because there's this thing called the English language that has all these words, and it has a bunch of conventions for how you arrange those words and words you use where, how you maybe use commas if you're writing stuff down, that allows you to clearly communicate to another person the ideas that are in your head. So I'm trying to transmit something in my head to your head. The language is the medium of that communication. So if you're in rebellion of the medium of communication, then are you trying to communicate to people? I would actually think McCarthy's not fully in rebellion. He just is like arrogant enough to think that like commas don't matter and things like that. And I just find his prose just really awkward, ugly sounding. But it's still a postmodern idea that like I can just not have the conventions of the language. If you were to turn in, if you were to like give to a publisher or an agent a manuscript that had prose like Blood Meridian, they would never publish it. So I don't know how that happened, but think of you as yourself, and if you were to put it out on you self-publish it, you're going to get a bunch of low-star reviews. They're like, this guy doesn't know how to write. He needs an editor. That's what people's response is going to be. I have no idea what he's writing. He doesn't use commas. But somehow, because of the facetiousness of modern literature, people can put Cormac McCarthy's prose on there and be like, oh, that's cool that he doesn't use commas. I'm like, maybe he's more skillful with not using commas. I'll admit that, But you wouldn't get away with that because people expect you to adhere to the conventions of the language in order to communicate effectively. And I actually think he doesn't communicate effectively as a result, because there's a lot of gobbledygook where things are just kind of like, just did a huge run-on sentence and didn't separate any of the ideas so that like we could know what he's talking about. He also does things where it's like a necklace of dead ears that look like figs. So how did we know they're dead ears? They're like ears that were cut off. I think that was in Blood Meridian, but I'm trying to remember. I'll read the entirety of Blood Meridian one of these days and give people the analysis, just because people are constantly asking for it. But if I do trash it, you're just gonna have to deal with the fact that I'm not guzzling Cormac McCarthy's cum like you are. You're just gonna have to live with that. Sometimes I think that kind of stuff sucks. No, for me, I've been looking at classic stories and studies, the hero's journey, Campbell's work. I think, that's another one I need to probably address at some point, is like the hero of 1,000 faces. It's not, I wouldn't use it as a framework to build a story. That's all I'll say for right now. We'll dive deeper into it in like another day. So help me figure out what kind of story I want to tell. Like, if you're looking at it as prescriptive, it's like, I have to tell a story like this. I've met so many people that are like this. How do I do this hero's journey thing? I'm like, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. My goal is not to reinvent the wheel, but create a competent wheel, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's part of the conventions of literature too. Like, we're adhering a little bit to genre conventions and things because we know that's what people want to read. And it's within certain conventions, it makes it easier to communicate if you stick to those conventions. Some people complain when pagan myths are reimagined in more Christianized worldview, but I always think, why not? Pagans would do the same to Christian stories. It depends, right? So there's a syncretism that exists in the Roman world where they would be like, yeah, your god is totally just Jupiter, right? We're just worshiping the same god, We'll call it Jupiter tier or something, right? But pagans had a more subtle view where it's like they could and could not be different. Like the Jupiter in your house might not be the Jupiter at the temple. It's kind of weird, right? They held a lot of doublethink sometimes. That the god was their god, but also maybe the Roman god at the same time. Sometimes you get this even with like Assyrian stuff, is like they waged war and then took their gods back to Assyria to properly honor them. Like that there's this religious layer to the war because the people that they're conquering aren't really honoring the gods, and their gods want to be treated properly. They're not being treated properly down there. Do you think one can write classical hero in the mundane like Ulysses, but without the parallel to the Odyssey, like an original story in the everyday, or is that just Don Quixote? I like Don Quixote, so I think you can. Well, why not? You can always try it. Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of stuff is fun. Something like, Kevin Smith movies kind of did that. A lot of comedies are that way. So especially for comedies, I think that works great. I think part of why some men flock to the manosphere on the internet is because we have a desert of heroes in modern media for them to look up to. That's true to a certain extent, yeah. But the manosphere tends to really promote Machiavellianism, not heroism. They view heroism as like a, especially if you get into like MGTOW people, it's like that's like naivete. You need to be Machiavellian. We should be grateful it hasn't evolved into modern acronyms like LOL. Oh man, just wait until like we're all old men and it's like, oh, this is unreadable because it's just a bunch of modern acronyms. Oh, it's gonna be bad. What would you say is the modern hero in today's popular mainstream media? I don't know. Example of what I mean about pagans reinventing Christian stories in their worldview is A Wrinkle in Time movie, which replaced the Christian elements with pantheism. I didn't watch that movie, but I know what you mean now. That's why 40K is so popular. Is the map behind you OG? Yeah, I drew that map. This is from Needle Ash. So yeah, this is from Needle Ash. There's also, oh, let me see my camera here. Hold on. Maybe I can, there you go. A little more light. So yeah, this is the map from Needle Ash that I drew. I have to like, you can see a big print of the cover of Water of Awakening. Kind of hard to see, it's a little dark in here because I have like this one light and then my monitor, that's my lighting for this stream. Yeah, there you go. Fall off, little camera. There we go. Looks good. All right, so yeah, that's from Needle Ash. Here we go. This book. This should be right at the beginning. If you look on my Ko-Fi, you can actually commission a fantasy map. If you want me to draw you a fantasy map in the style, it's all hand done. The letters are not hand done, but I could hand do the letters as well. I don't know if y'all can see that. There we go. I like to put them in my fantasy books. Do some hand done maps. Nice little touch. What time is that? All right. Is the map behind you OG? Guzzling is trashing 3 of the 4 books I listed of his. Got it. All right. I'm just saying there's so many people that are like, oh, I love him. I'm like, I don't get it. Yeah, I don't get it. Earlier, when talking about tragic heroes, I said all anti-war movies promote enlistment. I was referring to the failure to deliver to the intended message of tragedy. Oh, okay, that's interesting. So, I don't know what an anti-war movie is necessarily supposed to look like. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what an anti-war movie is exactly supposed to look like. Because I've seen movies that people say are anti-war, and it's hard to say exactly how they're anti-war. Like, I was told The Thin Red Line was this anti-war movie. And I remember watching it, and it just didn't really have a story, so I didn't really like it very much. But, I don't really know how it would have like a good anti-war message. Is Apocalypse Now an anti-war movie? I mean, to me, that's just a retelling of Heart of Darkness. I didn't really get it as an anti-war movie either. If that's what an anti-war movie is supposed to be like, I can totally get it. You know, I can totally get why people would think that. or would see something like that and then maybe even be encouraged to join the military. It's because you show people doing like heroic actions or having big adventures, and then people want to do that. Kind of makes sense. And it could be that like you notice that like the military is never painted as incompetent in movies. This is an interesting thing. And some people say it's like because of like the government's influence on Hollywood or something like this, but you almost never see the military as straight up incompetent, like they don't know what they're doing and they're wasting people's lives. Not unless you're like showing like a Soviet army or something. So even in an anti-war movie, the army is not incompetent. Rather, what they tend to show is that the army is like people are dying in war, and that's bad. Or they're doing bad things, like in Platoon, where they like destroyed that village. They destroyed this village in Platoon. Is Platoon an anti-war movie? I've had people tell me it is. And I could see it from a certain perspective. But what we don't see is like the military being a completely like incompetent force. And in most like superhero movies, we see the military is very strong and very good, and the government is very powerful and blah, blah, blah. There's very little like painting them as buffoons, which is the way that you would actually probably get people to not join the army. If your point was to get people to not join the army, you'd show them being buffoons. Is Full Metal Jacket an anti-war movie? I could see that, yeah. But you're seeing a lot of people do badass stuff though too, you know? So that's in it as well. Thank you for the grats. Well, congratulations. Like even Apocalypse Now is like, man, he lived a life and they play cool music. I feel like it always has the opposite effect. Yeah, it shows people doing cool stuff and like doing great things because that's part of storytelling. I think mafia movies make people kind of idealize the mafia. Even something like Scarface, where he like gets killed and he gets killed at the end, you know? Or Godfather, where like everything that matters to him gets taken away by the end of the second movie and the third movie too. Really, people don't like to talk about Godfather 3. I haven't watched Godfather 3 in a long time, but I didn't think it was that bad. I can see why some people don't like it, you know, but I didn't see it as being all that bad. So anyway, yes. Let me go ahead and sum this up before I get going here. Quick little condensation of what we're looking at. Lots of aspiring gangsters have posters of Godfather and Scarface on their walls. Yeah, because you showed them doing badass stuff and you're like, oh, I want to be badass like them. I want to be strong, Machiavellian. I want to have power and women and money. Even, you know, the deeper layers of that is about like the tragic downfall of the characters, whether Goodfellas or it's Godfather, usually, or Scarface even. It's more about how that character suffers a major downfall because of their inability to walk away and, you know, just walk away. That's one in Heat, by the way, is, you know, there's this thing like, you know, if you want to make moves on the street, you gotta make no connections, have nothing in your life you can't walk out on in 30 seconds flat when you feel the heat around the corner. And you have a character who basically lives because he didn't do that. He tried to go get his wife and she like warned him. And then a character who couldn't walk away from his revenge. And that's why he gets killed. You know, it's kind of a tragic end. And like the cop and the robber are like holding hands at the end because they understand that there's a similarity between themselves. With a story like that. But that's not really like heroes and anti-heroes. Like kind of what I really wanted to start with the classical definition, kind of look like. What are we using in our stories? Are we really telling like a heroic fiction story, or is this something else? Is this something different? Water of Awakening could be thought of as heroic fiction on a certain level too. Someone mentioned it further up. You can't control interpretations. People are going to walk away with their own views on media unless you have a character look straight into the camera and yell the message like war is bad. This was like a discussion with Starship Troopers. I don't know, that blew up on Twitter. I talked about it years ago. I don't need to like walk over it again, but Starship Troopers is entertaining to me. When it came out, I thought it was a stupid movie. I didn't like it. And I only thought it was interesting later when I realized that it's a satire that people don't understand. They don't understand that Starship Troopers, the way Verhoeven frames it, is that it is a propaganda movie for the society that is fighting the Arachnids. That's why everybody looks so good. That's why everything's so clean. That's why everybody's so heroic, right? It's kind of what Hardwick was talking about. Like it's supposed to be a propaganda movie, but most people don't get that layer at all, and they're like, I don't see how this is satire of the Starship Troopers books. I'm like, it definitely is if you understand that it's basically just doing Starship Troopers as what if it's just a big propaganda book for, you're not seeing what things really look like is the point. That's not real. The movie isn't real, and neither is the society. Neil, I have to go, but it was awesome hanging out with you. Thank you. I'm going to go through your book, The Water of Awakening. I'll be sure to leave a review. Enjoying it a lot. Thank you so much. I'm glad you like it. I don't know. That's there's such an interesting idea as like anti-war movies make people want to join the army because you're showing people do heroic things. You're showing people be good. It's interesting to think about because I think Starship Troopers works that way. People are like, well, I want that society. It's like, of course you do. It's a propaganda movie. It's showing things that are good, and there's always like a tongue-in-cheek element to everything that's going on there that makes it a little more interesting. And that's partly because I don't as far as Robert Heinlein books go, Starship Troopers is not my favorite, and it's not even one that I really like. There's not much story, and I don't really like the ideas that are in it, though I can see a certain appeal for some people to like think about what suffrage in a republic actually should be. Like who has skin in the game to actually participate? Is it the soldiers? If the soldiers are the only people with political power, what that actually is feudalism. That's what it turns into, right? That's what happened with the Romans, is that they eventually transitioned to the military had all the political power, and then that began really the medieval period of feudalism. The Elf King in El Shafal is a tragic character, an anti-hero though, right? I wouldn't call him an anti-hero. Sorry, I missed some of these. I'm going back up through it. I wouldn't call him an anti-hero. He's mad. He's insane. So he's not really a hero. Maybe he was a hero in like the past, the distant past. I know a former CSI though, through the internet. She said that a bunch of crime scenes involving gang members had Scarface posters. Dang. Sounds about right. Jarhead is probably a good anti-war movie since the entire movie is 90% of some guy just waiting for something to happen, then suddenly, boom, war, lover, go home. Some superhero stories focus on good upbringing. Doc Savage's mother, mom, Pa Kent, Uncle Ben, and Aunt May. Yeah, that's a great point. They did have good parents. Things that helped them to be good, right? Superman had great parents, his foster parents. Spider-Man had a good upbringing. Lots of them have good upbringings. It doesn't have to be, I think, starting from like somebody who had a tragic backstory with like abusive parents or something. A lot of times that's unrealistic because if you had abusive parents, you probably have like lower functioning and especially lower emotional functioning. You're not going to be able to just automatically be good. You're probably going to start bad and have to like learn to be good. You're going to start as a drug addict and like have to have somebody help you not be a drug addict. The one thing I will say about controlling interpretations is that if you take it to the extreme, there's this postmodern idea that like the response of the audience is subjective and is valid no matter what. That's where you get a lot of chance music and sort of John Cage's ideas, where it's like whatever people feel is okay, and we'll just do random music. It'll be completely aleatoric, random, and then whatever people feel, they feel, and that's good, and that's the art. It's like, well, I think you need intent. So the final postmodern piece, and this happened 70 years ago, by the way, this is very old, is like removing artistic intent from the artist. That's what aleatoric music and aleatoric art was all about. Random art. How do we introduce randomness and let people see what they want to see in it? We're taking artistic intent out of it. At that point, is it art? And I'm just going to leave that as a rhetorical question. Like, is that art to you? Is a classical hero then defined by feats and almost a series of interconnected short stories and maybe an overarching story goal? A classical hero, let's take him out of the context of like, how do I write one? A classical hero is like a demigod. A classical hero is divinely appointed and is better and bigger and stronger and better than other men. That's a classical hero. He's usually doing heroic feats. So that's what he's doing in the movie or doing in the story. Fighting monsters, things that are bigger than men. So the whole point of heroic stories is that they're things outside of normal. You're fighting gorgons and hydras and you're fighting dragons. Like, that's heroic stuff. Okay. So overarching story goal, that just would depend on the story you want to write, or like what tale they happen to be in, or what they want from it. It could be that they're cleaning the stables to try to get a wife. It could be they're, there's many things that motivate heroes. Beowulf would be probably more of a classical hero, right? There's lots of things that motivate them, but they're mainly doing heroic feats. And then they also tend to have some sort of divine appointment. There's something special about them. They're a chosen one on some level. Also, she said a bunch of them were aspiring rappers. Yeah, I've heard that a lot too. That's weird too. Jarhead. Okay. I think this is good. I'm going to check to see if I missed any more messages. And then we'll move on. Okay. Not really getting a lot on the other sites today, just YouTube, which is fine. All right, folks. I think that's going to be about it. Doc Savage's father raised him from childhood to be a peak human. It probably wouldn't work in real life, but it works for the stories. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, there's something special usually about them. And it's okay, like in a modern treatment, because we don't view the gods, we don't have a pagan view of the world. It'd be something else that would make them special in like a post-pagan treatment, right? Like they wouldn't necessarily be Zeus's son, but they could be, or Apollo's son. But they could be, have some kind of special power, be raised to be a ninja, fight ninjutsu parent or something, right? There's lots of different ways that you can impart their specialness, their betterness than other people. That's the whole idea of why superheroes are compelling, is they're better than other people. And then they do heroic acts. They do things that are bigger and crazier and more epic than what normal people do. That's the whole shtick of superheroes. And that's the shtick of heroes too, as well. So that's it for today. Gotta link all my stuff here. It's all in the description box. But here's the Patreon. I do a free book every month on Patreon. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do for March. I think I'm gonna do the third Moonsong book for March. Is what I'm gonna do. There's literally a new show on Netflix, House of Ninjas, about a ninja family in the modern day. Hilarious. I was watching one on HBO Max, an anime about ninjas. It's really silly. I might do a little content on it. We'll see. Anything else that's there? Oh yeah, you can hop over to the music only channel. That's good. All right. I think that's going to be it, folks. I do appreciate everybody stopping by and having a conversation with me. I'll see you all next time. Have a great day.